Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. This is going to be a very quiet and chill video. I'm just going to give you some behind the scenes of this recent gouache mousse painting I did. Starting with a little mock-up concept art I did on Procreate. I really enjoy digital art for my sketches and mock-ups because I can so quickly change the color of things, move things around. So Procreate is definitely my go-to when I'm planning pieces. Here I am doing a quick one color watercolor wash for a background. This kind of helps all the colors flow better together. I like having a base color to kind of compare my other colors to when I'm color testing. And I think it just adds some really nice textures as well. Besides that first watercolor wash, I used solely gouache for this piece. Gouache, and a little bit later you'll see an acrylic marker. But I have been trying to get more accustomed to gouache. Watercolor is my favorite, as many of you know. It's my baby. But I've been really enjoying kind of that matte opacity that gouache can bring to pieces. So I've been trying to explore it a little bit more. I love how thick and creamy these paints are. Oh my goodness, they just flow so smoothly onto the paper. Which reminds me, the paper I'm using is Arches, and I usually use a more rough tooth for my paper, but because I wanted kind of that flat matte look, I went with a very smooth paper this time. A dear friend actually commissioned this piece from me. He wanted a mousse, kind of in the style of one of my old rhino paintings, but he told me that the theme for his room was cryptids and mythological creatures, specifically cryptids from North America, so think Sasquatch, Mothman, things like that. And so as soon as I heard that, I immediately thought of more North American folk art, which made me think of quilts. I've always had such a love for textiles, specifically tapestries, but I love the colors that are in traditional folk quilts, so a lot of my inspiration for this piece came from that. And when I found out that he loved cryptids so much, I just knew I had to include some jackalopes. He asked for a moose, but I was like, I think this piece really needs some jackalopes in the corners, so you'll see me painting those hairs in a moment. The quilt that inspired me the most in this piece, especially for the color palette, is called Soldier's Quilt. Unfortunately, the artist is unidentified, but it was believed to have been made between 1854 and 1890, and the location says probably United States, Canada, and Great Britain. So we don't actually know a lot about this quilt, but I loved the colors of this one, and the diamond pattern I'm working on right now was heavily inspired by that. If you look up Soldier's Quilt, a picture of it should come up. Their diamonds are a bit more thin than mine. They're definitely more of a classic diamond shape, whereas mine are pretty much just perfect squares turned on their sides. But I just absolutely loved that bright blue, kind of a teal color, the red, the kind of mustardy yellow, and then a very, very dark blue. Here was the start of a new new day. I've got my matcha and my test card. I always like to keep these test cards handy for figuring out colors, because while you're mixing and the paint is wet, it actually turns out to be a slightly different color than how it dries. So having this card nearby kind of helps me figure out what exactly it's going to look like once I put it down on the paper. My goal for this day was to completely tackle and finish the border. At this point, I did not quite know how I wanted to do the background yet, and I figured, you know, going ahead and doing the border might give me some better ideas and how the finished product might look like. So that was my goal for this day. I believe I finished it all, but I ended up having to stop painting early once I got to the moose because my neck was hurting so bad. I have such bad posture while I'm painting these tiny details. I crane my neck in so far and close to the paper. It's such a bad habit, and I know I'm not the only one. I'm trying to do better about it, but there's just something about getting close as you can to the paper to figure out these teeny tiny details. I loved working on these little starburst shapes. The ding dang camera kept trying to focus on my thumb, so I apologize. It keeps going in and out of focus. But I love how this whole pattern is pretty much made up of triangles. I don't know, there's something about it that I think makes it all feel like it connects better, having those same shaped motifs throughout the whole piece. And it just reminds me of those quilts. Growing up, I had this old quilt made for my parents by, I think, their aunt or something. And it became our sick blanket. Whenever anyone in my house was feeling bad or even just sad and not having a good day, we would get out this huge comfy quilt. It was the best thing ever, and it got to the point where all the stuffing was pretty much pulled out and there was thread everywhere, and I tried to fix it, but unfortunately I don't know enough about sewing quite yet to tackle on a project that huge. But I love the sentimental value that quilts have, and family blankets and things like that. There's such history in them, and it was really fun to kind of look up inspirational photos and learn kind of more about their history, because even the patterns themselves have such history. You can track how the patterns have grown and changed throughout the years and as they move on to different cultures and countries. Oh, so fascinating. When looking at a lot of these old quilts and patterns, I kind of noticed that surrounding all the shapes would be a really bold thread color. And so I knew I wanted to outline all of my patterns with one single color, but the tricky part was deciding on that color. I knew I wanted it to be a shade of red. So here I am testing out 2 different colored pencils and 2 different Acrylograph pens by Archer and Olive to see how the colors look on top of the several different colors that are in the piece. I ultimately decided on this kind of pinky mauve-y color that is an Acrylograph pen. These pens are my new obsession, you guys. Oh my goodness, I bought a couple different sets for my reading journal this year because I wanted to have a physical reading journal and mark everything down. And oh my goodness, there's so many great colors. They go on so smoothly. They have a very matte look, so I feel like they blended in with the gouache very seamlessly. New obsession. I can't recommend them enough. I love them. I just ordered another set today. I have a problem, but look how wonderful it is. I love this color. Archer and Olive, sponsor me please. Thank you. this is where I struggled the most. I'm very accustomed and used to painting animals with watercolor. I've just been doing it so much for the past few years. It comes very naturally to me now. I'm so used to, the transparency and the layering of watercolor. Gouache is a whole different story. So I actually got very frustrated with starting on the animals, a lot more than I had expected, honestly. Having that thicker opacity and the matte look that comes with gouache was so foreign to me when painting animals. So I really had to figure out a new technique for fur textures and blending. It was hard. It was so hard. I thought my skills would transfer over more, but it was really a learning curve for me. This is the next day, as you can tell by the lighting difference. The lighting in my studio is so much more blue in the mornings, so I'm sorry it's not nice and more crystal clear as some of the other scenes. But I got so frustrated with trying to paint the animals that I decided to take a break and work on the background. So I actually took a picture of what the painting had looked like at this point, put it back into Procreate, and then tested out a bunch of different background ideas. At first I thought I would be fine with just having the two green and yellow big blocks of color, but I decided I really wanted to make it look more like a quilt. So I took those two starburst patterns that were in the top corners and decided to carry them throughout the piece. I did change up the colors a little bit. As you can see, the white part of the starbursts kind of mirror each other. So on one half it's facing towards the middle, and then on the other half it's facing to the middle again, just so it would kind of bring your eye down from those corners. And I think it was really successful. I was scared it might be a little too busy, but I think it really does have that quilt look that I was going for. With the background pretty much done except for outlining everything, it was time to get back to work on the animals. I decided that because so much of the background is just flat color, that the animals really needed some texture. So I added a bunch of these fur lines, and I really like how it came out. I think it added a lot. I think it makes the moose stand out a bit more. I love the mother moose. She's so pretty. And I think by adding all those tiny little details, it brought her to life a lot more than the direction it was headed earlier. So I'm glad I worked that out. Here's what it looked like after I outlined all the background patterns. So the only thing left to do was the jackalopes in the corners. And here I am outlining the jackalope once again in that mauve-y acrylograph color. And here is the finished piece. I am so pleased with how it came out. This is really my first big conceptual piece of 2023, so I feel like it has a strong start, which is really encouraging. Usually I outline my animals in black, so it was really fun to try out a new outlining color, and I really liked the effect. So I'm probably going to experiment with that more. I am loving gouache so much. So you can probably expect to see a lot more gouache pieces from me coming up. But I hope you like this piece as much as I do. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, you are loved and you are special, and I will see you soon. Bye, friends.